Kevin. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay without a mic? Good. Okay, good. Well, I want to talk with you this morning about applications of types of the technologies we've talked about earlier this morning. And I want to do it in a slightly different way than giving you statistics and so on. I want to tell you a bit of a story that we use at Kanata Health Solutions as an inspiration for helping us plan our product roadmap and also the type of technology that we're actively developing. Before I do, I'll just give you a bit of a brief background on the company. Kanata Health Solutions is the commercialization of, or early stage commercialization, of a research project that existed at the University of Alberta from 2002 until 2008, known as the Wireless Wearable Physiological Monitor Project. Dr. Masako Miyazaki, as principal investigator, was able to work very closely with a variety of companies in Canada and Japan to develop and clinically trial a variety of remote monitoring technologies. These technologies now are licensed out of the University of Alberta to Kanata Health Solutions, and we're actively now designing the commercial version of this product. The company is still pre-revenue, and the team is centered by and large here in Edmonton, with some very strong relationships still remaining back to, pardon me, a number of our partners in Japan. So Kanata Health Solutions is an organization that is focused on integrating a number of the technologies that we've talked about this morning as we move forward in our product roadmap. And what I'd like to do is share with you a little story that, as I mentioned, we use for our product road mapping. If we cast our mind forward, I'm going to cast it forward here to 2035, in large measure because I want to bypass a conversation about regulatory approvals till this afternoon, the challenges of scope of practice, the challenges of changing how we deliver care, let alone how we actually deal with payment for our care, and focus in on some of the technologies and how they might integrate into some compelling use cases. So in the context of that, I'd like to take you through a morning of a 90-year-old woman in 2035 who today would be 74 years of age, Mrs. Jane Smith. She has a few critical conditions that are impacting her quality of life and a variety of technologies that are designed to assist them. She suffers from early stage dementia. She has a heart condition and also has some physiological implants. In the context of her day, she's awoken by the sound of an alarm clock, which provides her through OLED technologies her quick update on today's weather, as well as providing her with a bit of an overview of her day's routine. This technology is one which does in fact exist today and can be used as an integration point between art and science. And in fact, you'll see a recurring theme in a lot of what I'll talk about today is the technologies we're talking about at the lab or at crude stages of early products are, in the context of our technology roadmap and our vision for where this is headed, embedded in everyday objects and devices. This morning wake-up call allows her to rise from her bed, which over the course of the evening has been monitoring her pulse and her respiration rates, and wakes her with some soothing lighting in the context of her room with some nice classical music to make sure that she doesn't wake up with too much of a start, given especially she has a cardiac condition. In the context of her movement towards her morning constitutional, as she heads towards the bathroom, motion sensors provide illumination along her path towards her washroom. And as she utilizes her facilities in the morning, her urine and stools are sampled for any potential impacts in her diet that need to be remedied in that morning's dietary supplements, and likewise to also assess the rest of her physiological conditions. This rather attractive looking commode is actually today by Toto sold at $40,000 a unit that does exactly this kind of analysis. It's active in Japan and also takes blood pressure through a blood pressure cuff. I can't imagine sitting on my toilet with my arm stuck through a device having my blood pressure. But in the context of how these technologies are now beginning to integrate and where they may go, this clearly, I think, sends us a way of integrating some of the interesting technologies we've learned of this morning. As she washes up, a variety of other sensors provide illumination of this temperature in her sink so that she doesn't accidentally scald her hands, given she also suffers from some visual impairments. And as she gets into the shower, a lighting ring also contains a series of motion sensors that are able to detect any slip or fall that may occur while she's actually in the shower. And it may be a little difficult to see in the slide, but there's also a Lexan chair for her to sit on for comfort as she goes about her morning routine. As she dries herself off, she starts to get dressed and, of course, starts with her undergarments. And given she's just recently gone through a procedure, which I'll be speaking about in a moment, she dons her blood pressure sensing panties, which are able to take her blood pressure. These, by the way, are now commercially available by Philips for $1,000 a pair. And she also dons a camisole, which is able to take her pulse and respiration rates, in which we've now fused the ability to sense these technologies in with our textiles. And this is actually a prototype unit that's being developed. The technology in the center is an indication that we can also embed into these textiles also a variety of other messaging systems. I was recently in Waterloo and spending some time in a mall waiting for my airplane. And I saw a T-shirt illuminating with LED lights that now shows that lighting systems and your T-shirts are now being tied together. This goes one step further, and last year at a Hong Kong textile show, you can program avatars on your cell phone and broadcast them to your shirt. So imagine, if you will, that Mrs. Jane Smith has a warning system embedded in her shirt because she suffers from dementia, that if she's disoriented, emergency messages can be transmitted on her clothing asking for assistance if she was outside of a tethered, geofenced zone within her community. We'll talk about that in a moment. In the context of warning in for after she's dressed to her kitchen, she's greeted by the avatar of her daughter, who explains to her the outcomes of her morning stool analysis and suggests that she has an extra bowl of bran cereal this morning, which when she takes it out along with her milk from her fridge and pantry, it's automatically keeping track of what groceries she does have on hand and available, and places an order for some supplementary groceries to be delivered later that day. As she makes her morning tea, she places the teapot on the wrong element, and her stove is intelligent enough to recognize that and turns itself off after 30 seconds of the element still being on and no weight being sensed on it. As she finishes her breakfast, she's about to go for her morning walk, and as she walks through her living room, this is just a really neat living room with fish tanks I quite enjoy, the sensors that are embedded in some of her furniture and in her surroundings are taking measures off of her various implant systems. Those implant systems provide her with data, as we've talked about this morning, that can be taking a sense of the structural bond of the stability of the implant system with the adjacent bone. And I presume that by 2035, we're also dealing with sensors that can also assess the amount of strain on surrounding muscles and tendons, so that we're able to provide some advice and guidance in the use of assistive devices for patients who may have strained themselves or may be about to. There are also implantable blood pressure sensors, that new procedure she's just gone through, which is why she's now calibrating those implantable blood pressure sensors with her Philips Panties. And this is actually technology developed by a company in New York now going through clinical trials. They implant these particular blood pressure sensors at 3 key arteries through the body and are able to use wireless technology to now assess your blood pressure. As she goes to leave, the paint on her door changes to red, and she is reminded by the voice of her daughter that she should be taking a cane based on the outcomes of her walk through her living room and the telemetry beamed off of her knee and hip implant. She goes and gets her GPS-enabled cane that also has a light given our winter conditions, at which point then her door paint changed to green, allowing her to leave with the kind blessings of her daughter. This particular cane is $75. It's available today, by the way. The paint is also talked about in the context of the next 10 to 15 years, replacing many of our flat screen televisions with the ability to start broadcasting more complex electronic signals with our articles that are embedded into our paint systems.